Good evening, campers, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. This is the second half of Episode 2. First half went up yesterday. This one will be going up the next day. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Anyway, had a lot of editing issues with this, so this one's going to be a little longer than I had anticipated. Originally, it was supposed to be one 30-minute episode, and it wound up being two that were about 50 minutes total. But anyway, we are working on upgrading our rocket from the previous episode. We want to take this thing into low carbon orbit in order to test some radial engines. As you'll see, I was apparently not paying a whole lot of attention when I was actually playing the game at this point, but we'll be back in a moment. Yeah, there we are. So what I want to do is I want to add some solid rocket boosters onto the side. They're nice and cheap, and they add a lot of extra oomph to the first stage of the rocket. And of course, got to remember to bolt them on nice and tight so they don't go wobbling around and steering your rocket in the wrong direction. And we also keep the aerodynamic fins on to keep this nice and stable. Trying to find a better way to put the radial engines that we're testing on here, but just wound up sticking right back in the same spot. Otherwise, rocket is pretty much unchanged. I think we are going to see one more tweak here. I'm pretty sure I wound up adding an extra fuel tank to the first stage. No? Okay, I guess I do that later. But we slightly modify the thrust on the SRBs so they don't get too aggressive with the initial burn. Don't want to waste all their power straining against just pushing against the air in the lower atmosphere. And as you can see, we grab one more contract while we're down there. You'll see that will actually come in handy once we get to orbit. That was a rescue contract. There is a Kerbal stranded in orbit that we need to rescue. So, nice, flawless launch. Up we go. Solid rocket boosters putting in good work there. Got it throttled back to 1 G of acceleration combined with the main engines. Bill Kerman taking the driver's seat for this one. And solid rocket booster separation is here, throttled up so we didn't lose any speed during that, and still going strong. Main engine's more than capable of lifting this rocket on its own, just didn't have quite enough punch to get us into orbit, so that was effectively like launching this rocket from halfway up. Clearing 10,000 now, starting our gravity turn. Nice stable rocket with all these fins down here, isn't it? And of course I was still having some performance issues at the time, so that's why we're looking up more than down. Turns out the terrain shaders option that I'd had enabled and hadn't noticed is costing me some pretty bad frame rate drops in this version of KSP. I did disable that for the next episode, so it'll be nice and smooth when we're close to the ground and looking at planets, that sort of thing. And first stage separation onto our upper stage booster now, which is going to be enough to get us into orbit itself. Just have to reach the top of our suborbital arc. Doing some science real quick while we're still in the atmosphere, and going. You'll notice this is a pretty reliable rocket. It also leaves very little orbital debris if you wind up using this for an extended mission. As long as you're careful about where you drop that upper stage booster. If you're taking it to the moon, you can just let it hit. If you're leaving it around Kerbin, it's good to deorbit the thing first. It's a pretty good multi-use rocket. It can get something really heavy into Kerbin orbit, or it can get a light spacecraft all the way out to the moon. One of my more reliable designs that I tend to go back to pretty much every time. And as you can see, we are now in orbit, just checking the parameters we need for testing that engine. Adding a little maneuver to fix that here. Gonna warp around to the other side of the planet. And through the magic of editing, I'm warping even faster than I appear to be in the game. Just doing one minor correction burn here, and I enjoy this maneuver enough that I'm actually showing this part in real time. Where we're going to light our rocket execute the burn, and then we're going to perform a fancy little maneuver here where we're going to light the engine, decouple, and then let that deorbit itself without any control whatsoever. So light the engine, decouples, light our engine, spin back around, and return to our orbit. No issues. And there goes our booster. That will deorbit itself, and that will save us some debris. Doing fairly well in this stage of the game. I don't think we've left anything up in orbit just yet, though we are about to. Spoilers. There we are. Got the engine test complete. All these engines are lit, and we're just turning them right back off again. We have no need to use them. They're very inefficient. I mean, they're good engines, but the 909's better. So they're just dead weight on this mission. And then I noticed, hey, we're awfully close to the orbit of that Kerbal we need to rescue, so why not swing by and pay him a visit? So doing a quick plane correction here, and then we're going to rendezvous with... I don't remember his name. It was one of the pre-generated names. Bobdred, I think? I think his name's Bobdred. Bob something. So executing our rendezvous maneuvers. Of course, you might be asking yourself, how am I supposed to rescue him with only one seat? And that's one of the funny little things about how Kerbal does rescue missions. You see, they don't care how you get the other Kerbal home, so long as you get the other Kerbal home. And they also don't care what you leave in orbit. So we're getting around to our rendezvous here. One more quick pop of the engine will bring us within a few meters of, well, a few hundred meters of our target Kerbal. No idea how he got into orbit since, you know, there's no ship up here with him, just him. Of course, once you're close, you can actually just switch to the Kerbal and fly over, but I find it more fun to do the rendezvous with the spacecraft itself. You have to assume that the Kerbal would be probably asleep or something, you know? I mean, if I was stuck in orbit, I'd probably be asleep. Save oxygen. Not that we have any evidence that Kerbals breathe oxygen. Killing our relative velocity now. We are 240... Yeah, I think that's 240 meters away from Bobdred Kerman. If you haven't noticed, orbital rendezvous is probably one of my better skills in Kerbal Space Program. It's just, I really enjoy that sort of thing, so I've done it a lot. Docking maneuvers are the kind of fine precision flying that I kind of like. I'm not the kind of dork who can plot one out eons and eons in advance and rendezvous a few meters away from a target, but I can get close and then do it manually pretty effectively every time. So just closing the gap a little bit more here. Less than 100 meters now. Bobdred Kerman probably not awake yet, though you'd think he might have gotten a flicker of the engine exhaust there briefly. So he could have woken up by now. I think it's probably time to send the alarm over. 5 meters away. Just trying to kill our relative velocities here. 909 engine's pretty good for that, though would have been better with RCS thrusters, didn't bring any. Don't know if I've unlocked any yet. So we see Bill is going on EVA to wake up Bobdred. Alright, Bob, wake up. Your ride's here. It's an interesting thing about space, one of the few ways to talk in space without using a radio is if you put your faceplate up to another astronaut's faceplate, you can actually talk through the glass. The vibrations will transfer your voice from one to the other. Not an effective form of communication, but it's better than nothing if you don't have your radio working. Bobdred climbing aboard the capsule and waving goodbye to Bill. We're going to go ahead and deorbit now. Nice quick deorbit. We're not going to make you watch quite all of it, so just fast forwarding here. Get around to the deorbit maneuver. Drop down into the atmosphere. And here we go. Nice smooth descent here. Pretty shallow arc, so nothing too terribly traumatic for this Kerbal who's been trapped up in space, though you can see he's rather terrified at the moment. Clearly not one of our bolder Kerbals. Though he did make it to space before Bill did, so in his defense. Bottom of the spacecraft glowing bright orange there. Landing gear out and parachute deployed. Looks like we're going to have a nice, gentle touchdown in the grasslands near these hills. Always want to aim for the grasslands. I was a little worried we were going to come down on the hills. Those can be kind of dangerous for your spacecraft. You tend to fall over and lose some parts there. If you're going for maximum recovery points on your upper stages, you always want to hit land, because as you saw in the last episode, stuff tends to break when it hits the water. Do a little bit more science now that we're here. And recover the spacecraft. So we now have full credit for rescuing Bobdred Kerman. Got us a nice boost in our reputation as well. Though that's going to come back to bite me in the butt next episode, because now Bill is stuck in space, and he's all out of snacks. Anyway, we are picking up another contract here. We've still got our Mooner exploration contract, and we're also going to check out these campaigns here. Got the fundraising campaign, which costs us reputation, gives us some extra money. I am definitely interested in that, because I don't really see much point in reputation yet. But if I can spend that to increase our fund gains, I will be more than happy to. And we're also going to unlock a few new pieces of spacecraft parts. We will also be going back and doing this again in the next episode. We have plenty of more parts to upgrade. We'll also be adding a few more parts. We are introducing a few more mod packs to this version of the game. Nothing too terribly complex. One of them is fairly complex, but it doesn't come into play until later on in the game. But first two are pretty simple. I'll talk more about those when we get to them. Well, I guess first three are pretty simple. Two of them are kind of a package deal. We'll talk about those when we get to them. Just trying to decide which pieces I want here. I do like getting big rocket parts, but it's hard to decide between that and the fuel line. Fuel lines make it much, much easier to build rockets. And of course, remember, I do have to pay to unlock all of these parts now because we are playing on hard mode. There's our RCS thrusters. Those could come in handy. Got solar power plants, batteries. Having a lot of trouble deciding here. Obviously, the probe cores and RCS thrusters would be very, very useful, so that's going to be very high on our priority list. I don't really need the airplane parts just yet. That's going to be something we probably do much later in the series, once we have a working space station. We'll work on developing some sort of single stage to orbit space plane to resupply that thing. This looks like we're going for the fuel lines. That'll also unlock us one of the smaller probe engines. Checking on our contracts. Because, of course, we do need to keep making money as we accomplish our scientific goals. Because science cannot be done if you're out of money, sadly. If only doing science was free, I would probably have a better job than I do right now, so... Just ignore that little bit of complaining. Not there. Not there. Anyway, going to be taking one contract here. We need to test a, going to be testing a radial decoupler. Not sure why I'm letting this play out in real time. Probably should have fast-forwarded this just a tiny bit, but, well, probably wanted to let you see exactly which available contracts we have here. So we're going to go for the radial decouplers. And of course we still have the Explore Moon contract active. Alright, so we're going to use a modified version of our original ship here. Nothing too terribly different, but a little more fuel on board. Add our decouplers on. So we will need those once we get into orbit. Double checking what our objectives are for that. And deciding we're going to bring the science along anyway. So scrapping the changes we made, going right back to this design. But we are going to need a little bit more oomph, I think, to get out to orbit. We've also unlocked controllable winglets, so we will be using those instead of the stationary winglets. That will allow us to use the bigger engines. Same efficiency, but more thrust, and they don't have thrust gimbling. Add a little more fuel to the upper stage, and we are going to make sure to remember to attach the landing legs back to those, I think. Yes, there we go. So slightly beefed up version of the previous rocket. Add the radial decouplers there that we need to test. Double check, make sure we've got everything right in the staging. Don't want to make any more mistakes like we did with Jeb in the first episode there. And looks good to me, so let's go ahead and add some goo experiments. Make sure they're centered with the decouplers because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and symmetry is beauty. And this now beefed up version of the rocket is ready to go. Nice strong acceleration there from the start. The extra fuel in the first stage, combined with the more powerful engines, will give us a little bit more of an advantage in getting into orbit. And of course we added some fuel to the upper stage too, so that will give us more time on orbit to conduct maneuvers. Getting ready to drop the solid rocket boosters here. This is our first attempt at a moon mission, so a lot riding on this particular launch. Rockets deployed. Looked like they were going to hit the first stage there, but luckily they did not. First stage now at maximum throttle. Still accelerating just about 1G. That's pretty much where you want to be below 10,000. You don't want to waste your force on while the atmosphere is nice and thick. Passing 10,000 here, starting our gravity turn. Nice standard descent profile. Since we've got these three very strong engines, that gives us a bit of an advantage. So going for orbit, we're going to be in a pretty high arc before we run out of fuel in this stage. It's a nice efficient engine cluster, that is. I think it was Scott Manley who did the tests in this game, and showed that it's more efficient to use more smaller engines than to use the single big engines, but, well, the big engines are just plain cooler, aren't they? Don't have any of those just yet, and you can see there's still some debris left on the surface from our 2 failed launches last episode. But we are in a very, very shallow suborbital trajectory, so we are going to be able to get into orbit pretty easily here. And still more than half the fuel left in the booster, so that should be plenty to get us into an encounter with the moon. Coming around to our maneuver node here. We are in space now, so able to fast forward a little bit better in the game, plus I'm also applying some post-effect fast forwarding. Performing our orbital insertion maneuver. And clear. We have made orbit and should be ready to conduct our first on-orbit experiments to fire off our radial attachment manifolds. Just double checking to make sure we've got our parameters set. Everything's green, so it's time to give them a test. And they're gone. So, contract accomplished. Lots of delicious, delicious funds ready for our use in the next mission. But we are not finished with this mission yet, so the show goes on. Just double checking to make sure everything cleared the spacecraft alright, and fast forwarding through our moon. Fast forwarding through our planning of the moon encounter. Looking for a good place for the maneuver node there. Found one right about there. And we're going to just be doing most of this burn pretty much manually. You'll see we just cleared the maneuver there and started tweaking things by sight rather than using the maneuver node, because of course we don't need to land, so we're just doing a flyby. I wasn't originally planning to go into orbit, but we're going to get there with plenty of fuel left, so we might as well. As we ditched the second stage already, so that's going to stay in orbit above Kerbal. Sadly, it's the only piece of debris we have left in orbit so far, I believe. Did a little bit of science in high Kerbal orbit because, you know, it's the first time we've been this high up. Bringing our orbit down over the moon, we've been captured, and circularizing our lunar orbit. There we go. So we're now in a nice low lunar orbit, and we've got lots and lots of science to do. Bill Kerman very happy about this. Bob Kerman very happy about this. Bill Kerman still cooling his heels in low Kerbal orbit without a spacecraft. Again, that will come back to haunt me next episode, but you will see that sometime later this week. Checking things out with our Kerbal head-mounted lamps, because I keep forgetting to put lights on my spacecraft, because lights cost money. I guess that's a good excuse now, isn't it? Now that there's actually money in the game, I can just cite that when I forget to put lights on things. Removing the data from our various science modules, just in case they explode when we hit the ground, as happened in our previous episode. Lost quite a bit of science from modules just getting disintegrated by Kerbal's oceans. Zipping around the moon, we want to do lots and lots of EVA science while we're here because there is so much delicious data to be gathered. Every single biome on the moon you can gather information from EVA when you're flying overhead. That's a nice little vista there. Got Kerbal rise, the sun still high in the sky. Some of the night lights of Kerbal visible there. And passing over one of the moon's more spectacular craters. Hoping these craters down here are big enough, and they were, to get us the Midland crater science. The large craters have individual names, but smaller craters tend to be a little more difficult to tell apart from each other. Some of the craters are counted as a separate biome, some are just considered part of the overall biome that they're in. You got midlands, highlands, and lowlands, and the larger craters within those will often have a separate biome. Though all the individual large craters in a certain biome will be the same biome, just like there's you saw there we got midland craters. So if you went to another relatively large crater in that same area, you would get the same science, even though it was technically a different crater. But the very, very large craters all have unique names and give you unique science information. Anyway, returning back to Kerbal now, just going to do this one by eyeball here. And we're set up for just an arrow braking maneuver here instead of a direct re-entry, because we don't know what we're going to come down over. And again, we don't want to be stuck over the ocean. But looks like we got a nice long stretch of continent here, so we're just going to go ahead and decelerate and bring ourselves down now. And there we go. We're on a nice shallow landing arc. Got to use up a bit more of that fuel as well. Saved us some time on orbit. Not too important yet, but if you have any kind of life support systems in, it's always good to keep your guys out of space when you can afford to. You can bring them down in orbit early. It's usually a good idea to bring them down in orbit early. Don't want to use up all those precious resources. Bob getting excited as he feels the re-entry effects here. And by excited, I mean terrified. Cutting it awfully close to the mountains once again, but once we have the parachute deployed and SAS off, we see we're just going to come down gently on the foothills to the west of them. Descending through these spectacular clouds. Once again, that is the Environmental Visual Enhancements mod, not the Kerbal Beautification mod. Environmental Visual Enhancements. Link is available in the description if you want to add that to your own. That is my favorite mod in the game. It makes all the planets in the game look spectacular. I saw Jewel with it during a sandbox mode, testing out the mods I'm adding next episode. And Jewel just looks absolutely stunning. It looks like a green Jupiter, basically. Just completely blown away by what this mod brings to the game. Hopefully we're going to see that soon ourselves in this version of the game, in our career mode save, but that's probably still a long way off. Anywho, recovering the vessel, get to check out how much science we brought back. And look at that, 400 some science, and our reputation is almost into the blue already. Over 100,000 funds. I think we're sitting in a pretty good situation. So with that, we are going to call this one an episode. That's the end of episode 2. Sorry I had to upload it in 2 parts. Again, editing nightmare. But I will see you later this week with part 3. Thank you.